Hey everyone, Laszlo Montgomery here. I'm back from London, just recovering from a bout of COVID, and happy at last to present to you the interview with Tilly Blythe and Abby McKinnon. This was recorded on February 1st, the date of the opening of the exhibition I've been telling you about since last year, Ziming Clockwork Treasures from China's Forbidden City. If you find yourself in the London vicinity between now and the 2nd of June 2024, you might want to consider stopping by the Science Museum to check it out. My thanks to the whole gang at the LSM, Tara, David, Lucy, and of course Tilly and Abby. Thanks everyone for listening, and thanks to my son Ethan, who came along for the ride and was conscripted to serve as the sound engineer for the interview. My thanks to all. So here's the interview. Hope you enjoy it. Hello everyone, greetings from South Kensington in London. This is Laszlo Montgomery. You're listening to the China History Podcast. As advertised since last year, I'm here at the London Science Museum for the opening of the Communicating Time and Culture exhibition, Ziming Ning Shi Juzhen, Clockwork Treasures from China's Forbidden City. We're going to be discussing clocks, the Ming and Qing dynasties, and the nexus where these horological and artistic masterpieces on display here, British envoys, and the emperors residing in the Forbidden City all came together. And I have the distinct pleasure to be joined by Abby McKinnon, curator of space technology here at the London Science Museum. And prior to that, Abby was the lead curator on this exhibition. And Professor Tilly Blythe, who leads the Department of Museum Studies at the University of Leicester. Tilly was formerly head of collections and principal curator here at the Science Museum. And I should also mention Jane Desborough, who unfortunately couldn't be with us this fine afternoon. Jane is the keeper of science collections here at the London Science Museum and author of the book, The Changing Face of Early Modern Time, 1550 to 1770. Welcome to both of you to the China History Podcast, and let me express my thanks and appreciation for the invite to be on hand for the exciting opening of this wonderful exhibition. The idea for this exhibition actually went back almost 6 years ago to 2018. COVID got in the way and delayed things a little, but here we are at last at the opening. Tilly, what was the genesis of this exhibition? How and where did this all begin? And how did you manage to put it all together and have it ready for today's opening?
So, as you say, Laszlo, it was nearly 6 years ago, so it's been a very long time coming, this exhibition, but fantastically exciting to have it opening. It really came to happen because I travelled with the director of the Science Museum, Ian Blatchford, and the director of International, Helen Jones, and a group of us all went out to Beijing and went to the Palace Museum. And there we met various people, but we were also invited to go to what's called their conservation hospital, which is the most awesome place. It's absolutely fantastic. For any conservator, it's like a dream come true. They basically have room after room to look after the various objects that they hold at the Palace Museum collections. So there's a whole room devoted to lacquer and various different things. There we saw one of the clocks, a pagoda clock, and they had just been working on the mechanism, working on the insides to make it work. And we saw it play the beautiful song of Jasmine Flower, and we were just blown away. You know, we were like, oh, awesome. And I think at that point, we kind of knew that we had to do an exhibition. But at that point, obviously, we had a lot of relationship building to do with the Palace Museum, a lot of research to do to understand the clocks. But that was really where the first idea came from. And then from that, there was also an exhibition at the Hong Kong Science Museum called Treasures of Time. And the Science Museum here in London worked very closely with the Science Museum in Hong Kong on that exhibition. We actually loaned various tools for making clocks to the Hong Kong exhibition. And again, we got to go and visit that exhibition and see these wonderful things, you know, these wonderful clocks. But they're not really clocks, aren't they? We're kind of calling them clocks, but they're automata, you know, they're mechanical marvels, they're, you know, machines of the imagination. I would say they're so much more than clocks, you know, they do so much more than tell the time. They're story pieces in themselves. So yeah, that's the kind of initial idea and the birth of it. But yeah, there are
How
nearly.
was the cooperation? Were they easy to work with and very accommodating?
It's been really interesting because obviously it's been the most difficult time to ever try and do something internationally of this kind of scale. So, none of us knew in 2018 that we were heading towards a global pandemic. That clearly had to slow everything down. And, there was a point where we weren't sure that the exhibition was going to happen. And that was from our side and from the Chinese side, because we just didn't know how long that would last, what that would look like. So clearly there's been, bumps along the road, but it was always great working with the Palace Museum. They've been fantastically supportive, and very generous in terms of lending us these clocks for this exhibition.
That's great. Abby, let's talk a little about what visitors can expect to see and experience. And having already seen it myself, I know visitors will be treated to something extraordinary. No digital images can do these pieces justice. They are quite breathtaking to see these up close and personal.
Yeah, absolutely. And unlike Tilly, I didn't actually get a chance to see the Zimingzhong until they actually arrived in the museum. And to just see the size and intricate detail and the gems and, the gold, it was really, really, as you say, far more incredible than any digital image could ever do. So when visitors come, they will obviously get to see a feature of 23 clocks, or Zimingzhong, from the Palace Museum. And these clocks were collected mainly by 3 Qing emperors during the sort of late 1600s through to the late 1700s. And it's really interesting. So some of these Zimingzhong were made in China. Some of them are a combination of British mechanisms and Chinese design and decoration, and a lot of them on display here back in Britain for the first time for over 300 years, were a bunch made in Britain and sent over. So there's a real interesting, fascinating story about trade and about the meeting of technologies and craftsmanship and people, through this trade. And through, the clockmaking workshop in the Forbidden City, where you had European and Chinese clockmakers working together. So in addition to being able to learn a little bit about the trade of these incredible objects, you will also get to learn a bit about the mechanics of them as well, and the design and decoration and all of the skills and techniques that were kind of needed to make one of these incredible objects.
Can you explain the most essential mechanical understanding one might need to appreciate what's beyond the beauty of what you just see on the outside?
Yeah, so I think a good example is looking at the country scene clock, which I think Tilly might talk a little bit about later, but that's one of our most special clocks that we have on display. Made in Britain, it is very large and it has a lot of moving parts, and I think that whole mechanism is powered by one mechanism. So there's not lots of different gears and mechanisms and things you need to wind up. One mechanism powers all of the movement. And I think that is a really good example of kind of how technical these pieces are. And in the exhibition as well, you can see we have 4 interactives from the Hong Kong Science Museum. And they not only are beautifully made and constructed, but really give you a clear idea of how various aspects of the Zimingzhong work. So you wind it up, you can see very clearly the spring winding up, you release that power, and you can see how the dome opens and closes, or how the glass rods, which when they spin look like falling water. There's also one that shows you how the clockwork mechanics work. So it's a real nice insight and a hands-on insight into the incredible intricacies of these pieces.
Yeah, it's a pity we can't see them all moving and see all the moving parts. Would even make it more wondrous. But why did the emperor establish a royal workshop to manufacture these clocks?
So the clockmaking became very important to the Chinese emperor. They didn't want to just be, buying them through, the Guangzhou port. They wanted to be able to make their own, and they were perfectly capable of doing that. And so they had missionaries had come to visit the Forbidden City, and so there was already this kind of connection between, Europe and the imperial city. So the clockmaking workshop was kind of a natural extension of that, to be able to create their own clocks to help establish their kind of right to rule, the emperors, very connected to astronomy and to the sky and to the movement of the stars and the moon, and these timepieces allowed them to accurately time celestial events, which helped them to kind of prove their right to rule. And also, it did sort of show their kind of prestige and power to be able to produce their own, but also to be able to display ones that they'd purchased from abroad to show their kind of international reach.
I wonder if the British were cooperative in handing over some of this technology and know-how. Was it freely given?
Yes, yeah, in fact.
The good old days.
The missionaries, Matteo Ricci, he's, not from Britain, but came over and they came armed with scientific instruments and these kind of mechanical pieces as an in to kind of get the emperor to sort of welcome them in. But I think it's also important to note as well that clockwork mechanics didn't originate in Europe or in the West or in Britain even. There's evidence of clockwork mechanics actually existing in lots of different cultures and in China long before this period. And so the question is kind of, did that technology just kind of fall away and then sort of rediscovered? But absolutely, I mean, the mechanical clocks and other scientific instruments was definitely a way for the missionaries to kind of get their foot in the door.
Nice. Tilly, what can you tell us about the entirety of the Hall of Clocks exhibit at the Palace Museum? You've seen it.
I have, yeah. It's a really interesting exhibit because, of course, the Palace Museum has over 1,000 clocks in their collection. So,
how many are on display?
Just, we're talking 20 or 30 is really not many. So it's a tiny, tiny proportion of what they hold. And the numbers of daily visitors you have in Beijing is extraordinary. So they have about 40,000 visitors coming to the Forbidden City every day. So it's actually really hard to get a good look at the clocks. You go through the gallery and there are hordes of people photographing them, wanting to be photographed with them, all in awe of these objects. But it's actually a very different experience, I would say, to the one that you'll get here in London, where you have a slightly more intimate experience. It's phenomenal to see, but at the same time, they're just dealing with a whole different range of visitor numbers than come to the Science Museum in London.
Abby, in Chinese culture, offering someone a clock as a gift is, considered somewhat inappropriate. How did the British envoys get around that faux pas? The word for clock, zhong, sounds the same as the character zhong, which means the end or to finish, which could be misconstrued to mean one is wishing the end for the person being gifted the clock. And how'd they get around that?
Yeah, so thanks. I think, first of all, it's probably important to note that the British almost certainly wouldn't have known that, of course, when creating these clocks. But they actually weren't given as gifts. So they were actually they were designed and manufactured in Britain as trade pieces. So they were sent over on merchant ships. They were traded for Chinese goods potentially, or potentially for silver. But these were actually purchased by the emperor, and the emperor had what's called a hoppo, who was kind of the customs official who was in the Guangzhou port, specifically looking out for items like this that the emperor might want. And they were given a budget, and they would purchase these on behalf of the emperor. And it was also additionally a kind of way for these hoppos who represented regional areas within China to kind of show their loyalty and say, look, I'm giving you this incredible clock that you've asked for. So to have on display. So yeah, it was not so much a gift from the British side as you say, that might not have gone down so well.
Yeah, I'm sure there were plenty of those kind of misunderstandings,
Yes.
as everyone was just trying to get to know everybody at that time. Tilly, for the benefit of those lacking degrees in museology, can you tell us about the time and culture research that has supported the exhibition development, as well as the creation of the digital experience and events around the exhibition?
Yeah, so it's really interesting when you come to an exhibition like this, because you see all these wonderful objects, but you very rarely think about the extent of the research that's had to go in to make an exhibition like this come to be. So with this exhibition, we were really, really lucky that early on we were awarded a grant for a piece of research called Time, Culture and Identity that was funded for us by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which is like a UK funding council from the government. And that piece of research allowed us to look, as Abby was saying, about this translation of trade from the 18th century to today, with the idea of clocks kind of moving between Britain and China and the ideas behind them travelling as well. But also to look at today this idea of kind of creative technology and how you might bring together digital creatives around something like these clocks. So it enabled us to do some of that early research around, what do we know about these machines? What do we know about the mechanisms? What do we know about the makers? And to do some audience research. So what do we know about the way that visitors react to clocks like this? And we did some work both in Beijing, in Hong Kong, and here in London, looking at how visitors connected to the clocks themselves. And then we also created this kind of digital exhibit which goes alongside the exhibition outside as a kind of taster for what you might get inside. So it was a really great opportunity to kind of think more deeply about the clocks and to think about what they might mean to us in different cultures. And then more recently, we've been awarded another piece of funding called Communicating Time and Culture, again from the HRC, and that's enabling us to do a whole range of public engagement events to make sure that people who come to visit the exhibition, but also the Chinese community in London, get to really connect with their history and with this kind of dual history between Britain and China. So it's rare that we've had those kind of integrated research projects, but it's really enabled us to kind of push the boundaries, I think, further than we might have done if we hadn't had that opportunity.
If I could just add on to that, just to say from the exhibition side, it was really critical for us, the connections and the research that the research team did kind of in advance, which, as Tilly said, is not, as much as we want that to happen with every exhibition we do, it's just not that realistic to kind of have that research support from the kind of get-go, and also just the sort of personal connections that were made with people working in China, and to be able to kind of have a line with them during exhibition development and kind of check things with them. And to have that kind of trove of research to look back on, to kind of know what we know, but also to know what we don't know.
It's also really interesting what was known in China compared to what was known in the UK, and the differences of that knowledge in terms of the kind of archive that had been referred to and the horological knowledge. It's really interesting to bring that together.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, some of the people from the Palace Museum have come over and kind of said, oh, we didn't know that about, this clock or that clock, or how did you find that out? So already there's like a really nice kind of sharing of research and information back to the Palace Museum about stuff that we've kind of discovered from archives in the UK.
The way it should be.
Yeah.
So what can visitors to the Science Museum expect to see and experience, aside from lovers of Chinese culture, history, and of course anyone with a passion for horology? Do you think this would be something people of all ages might want to see?
I think possibly. I would say the exhibition's definitely aimed at a probably young adult and above age group. However, I mean, just the visual, nature of these clocks means that they absolutely can be enjoyed by, people and kids of all ages. I happen to know my 4-year-old would absolutely love looking at some of these clocks. There's so much detail and that you can really dig into, and you spend a lot of time looking at all of the little intricacies of every clock. So yeah, and so definitely something that absolutely anyone can enjoy. But probably aimed more at an adult audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're in for a treat. So with so many of these Zimingzhong chime clocks at the Palace Museum, how did you settle on these 23?
So it's a kind of iterative process, I think. We started, as I mentioned, we went to the Hong Kong Treasures of Time exhibition and we saw the range of clocks that they had there on display. And that was when we really started to kind of fall for some and ideally have those in the exhibition. And I think we came up with a kind of long list at that stage. Partly that was dictated by those where we might know the maker or we knew that there was a connection with Britain. So, clocks that had been made by James Cox were obviously of interest to us. But also we wanted to show the clocks that had been made in China and the translation of those ideas and techniques and the craftsmanship that had happened in China as well. So it was kind of combining those two things, but also thinking about some of those really kind of stellar pieces. There's a real wow factor when you walk in and see the lotus flower clock. It kind of is, it takes your breath away, So it's thinking about, which were going to be the showstoppers for visitors, which were going to be the clocks where they just thought, God, I'm so lucky to see this. So that was the way we came up with the long list. And then, of course, it's a conversation with the Palace Museum about what could travel, what kind of conservation state they were in, whether they were able to loan them to us. And I think a little bit of back and forth about, what was possible. And then, that's how we've ended up with the 23 that are on display now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned James Cox. He was a giant in this design and production of these Zimingzhong. Who was James Cox?
Yeah, so James Cox was a clockmaker who worked in Britain, and he is probably one of the single most well-known maker of Zimingzhong that we know about. And so his clocks feature fairly prominently in the exhibition. As Tilly said, picking out some of his clocks to display was quite important. So yeah, and it's kind of an interesting story because James Cox is this incredible figure, but of course you look at these Zimingzhong and you think, well, he himself has not made every single piece of this clock. So while his name is on it, there were hundreds of different makers, to clockmakers, to gilders, to jewelers, all working together to create these incredible pieces. And I think one of the things what I think is a nice sort of mystery about them is that, we just don't know a lot of these makers' names. They didn't get to put their names on the bits that they made. They've kind of fallen away in history. But to know how many people worked on them, it's a theme in the exhibition that we kind of, wanted to highlight that, James Cox, he's got his name on it. And there's a few other makers that we know about as well. But it was a real, collaboration amongst lots of different, technical craftsmen and people.
Mm-hmm. And not just in the UK, also in China. So one of the clocks has a James Cox mechanism, but we think the outside was actually made by craftspeople in China. So, a real merging of ideas.
Yeah.
And any personal favorites among these 23?
Absolutely. I mean, I do like a lot of them. However, I have to pick actually the one that Tilly just referenced, which is the crane clock that has carrying a pagoda. It's actually one of the smaller Zimingzhong that we have on display. So it's this beautiful crane who is carrying a small pagoda on its back, and it also has a lingxi mushroom in its mouth. And as Tilly mentioned, we know that the clockwork mechanism is James Cox because it's got his name on it, but it's really out of character for design-wise for his pieces. So it's the lingxi mushrooms, symbol of immortality. The crane is also one of a pair. There's another one back at the Palace Museum. Pears always, symbolizing partnership and marriage. And then also there's little dragons on top of the roof of the pagoda, symbolizing the emperor. So there's some really lovely imagery and symbolism on there that we really believe isn't James Cook, so must have been designed and made by Chinese craftspeople. But again, we just don't know who they are.
Tilly?
Oh, for me, it has to be the country scene clock. So again, this is just the most fantastical kind of piece of imagination. It's got a pecking chicken, it's got a cow, it's got a palm tree, it's got a woman spinning wool, and it's got this incredible scene at the bottom, which becomes revealed as it plays this music, where it's this country scene of a beautiful English country, just as it should be, perfect kind of Arcadia that is revealed. But it's this real mishmash of strange ideas about what the Chinese might desire, this strange palm tree, alongside this kind of mishmash of an English idealized view. And it's just so crazy. It's such a weird combination of things, and technically really, really complicated to all be powered through one mechanism. So yeah, I love it.
Have they been wound up?
Yeah, that one
Really?
has. That one, again, the Conservation Hospital worked with very closely and made it working again a couple of years ago. So yeah, that's been running. And for the research project, we were lucky enough for them to give us access to the inside of that clock, so we could actually see that mechanism and see how it worked.
There's a few of the clocks actually that do run. They will not be running in the exhibition, unfortunately, because obviously, over 300 years old. We have to make sure we look after them and, keep them for, 300 plus more years.
Hand them back in working condition. You don't want to create an international incident.
Yeah, but the Conservation Hospital has done an amazing job restoring a lot of these pieces.
Are they right on site at the Palace Museum?
Yeah. With a gentleman there who's like the conservation master, who I think is now he's now retired, but he has an incredible following because he a YouTube video and a TV series was made about him, and he's a bit of a kind of hero in China.
Celebrity. Masters of the Forbidden City is the name of the film.
Yeah, nice place to go to work every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think considering the nature of this discussion, it's apropos to utilize the Chinese idiom, 时光飞逝, time flies. I'm happy Carol Chung reached out to me 4 years ago and invited me to be part of this event. And to all CHP listeners in the UK and Europe and anyone else traveling to London, this show, Clockwork Treasures from China's Forbidden City, will be here at the Science Museum until June 2nd of this year, 2024. So, Tilly, Abby, any last-minute thoughts or comments? Anything to entice visitors to come to the exhibition?
I think for me it's just worth noting this kind of digital exhibit that we've created, because that is a chance to see the mechanisms working, to see inside the clocks. But also it was a coming together working with digital creatives in Beijing and digital creatives here in the UK to bring out these ideas around time, around the seasons, around this kind of epic understanding of time and clocks. So it's an added extra to the exhibition that Abby's curated. It's a nice taster that you can go into before or after the exhibition.
And I'd like to just to add to that too, that there is another layer to the exhibition which I didn't get a chance to mention, which is this collaboration that we had with the charity China Exchange, where we hosted some people from London who have Chinese heritage, and they came and they had a look at the clocks, and we had a discussion about them, and they actually wrote their own labels for a few of the clocks, which you can see throughout the exhibition. And I think for us, kind of like tying it from this kind of 300-year-old objects to modern day, getting their perspective on such historical objects, and not just historical objects, but objects that, belonged to the emperor, very kind of elite, not a lot of people would have seen or come across them. Tying them to people today, I think adds a nice little layer to the exhibition, these sort of personal experiences of symbolism that they see on the clocks, and also the way that they view the British-made ones. And I think hopefully visitors will come to this exhibition. They'll enjoy seeing the clocks, but perhaps spark some nice conversation about cultural exchanges, and so I hope people come and enjoy it.
They're in for a treat. Well, I think that is going to be that for this time. 自命中凝视巨江, Clockwork Treasures from China's Forbidden City. Come see it here at the London Science Museum. It'll be here till June 2nd. So my deepest thanks again to both of you, Tilly Blythe and Abby McKinnon, for spending this hour to discuss this exhibition. This is Laszlo Montgomery, thanking you all for listening. Join me again next time for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.